Welcome back. You know, back around the 70s, there was a catalog company out there, Herders. Everybody used to love to get the Herders catalog because they had not only had everything, they had fish hooks, they had fishing rods, they had shotguns, handguns, they had ammunition, all kinds of fishing tackle, hooks, shotgun wads. No matter what it was, they had it. You could get anything for your boat from Herders, but the most fascinating thing of all was that no matter how insignificant the product was, well, even if it was just nothing more than a snelled fish hook, they would have a long, at least one page of dissertation of why their fish hook was better than the other guy's fish hook. And it was fascinating reading. You know, you could sit there for hours reading all the different stories about all the different products. And that's part of marketing, because if they can convince you that theirs is better and superior to everybody else's, you're going to buy theirs. Well, such is the thing with so much of our gun products industry right now. You know, the gunsmithing has gone way, it's leaked out into the public arena. Nobody would ever, unless you were a gunsmith, you didn't even know about such companies as Brownells, because Brownells was simply selling to gunsmiths, and obviously it's very lucrative business for them to sell to whomever might buy their products. And some time ago they discovered that, especially during the internet, where people didn't have to buy a catalog, they could just go online. They discovered that people, you know, the average person would buy the same stuff that every gunsmith would buy, and it greatly expanded their customer base. Well, so among one of the products is torque wrenches. So I get a lot of questions about how much torque for this, that, or the other thing. How much torque to put on my side plate screws on my Smith & Wesson. How much torque do I put on screws to go into my action of my 3006, and how much screw torque do I put into my 1022. And that's really what brought this to mind today, and the reason why I'm coming here today with this particular video is because I had a question. It was probably about the 10th or 12th time that I got a question relating to or a comment relating to the torque on that takedown screw. We'll call it a takedown screw because that's what it is. Now, before they started using such things as Torx screws or hexagon screws and all these other things in here, it was simply a dished out. When I say the bottom of that slot is actually concave, it has a dish in it, which is certainly, there's no screwdrivers that have dishes, but what has a dished shape is a coin. Well, and this gun has been checked out before I came online. But you know, if we check out what that would fit, I got a quarter here. Well, a quarter is too wide. It basically bridges that brass escutcheon, so it doesn't. So that's too big. Let's go down to a nickel. A nickel. Well, the screw is too thick, so it doesn't fit. So a nickel doesn't fit that screw. So Papa Bear and Mama Bear didn't work, but I got my penny here. Baby Bear works just right. Now I can use that penny and I can tighten that screw up as tight as I want, which isn't much effort. You know, any kid could apply the same amount of pressure. You know, your fingers don't have an awful lot of torque to them, but basically I'm applying enough pressure so I've got that tight as I can go. And if you look at it, the screw slot is from 3 to 9, you'd call that on the clock. If I take my screwdriver and gently apply pressure, and I'll back it off, and I'll turn and tighten it. Now I'm applying pressure to that, significant pressure to that. Well, I'm looking still 3 to 9. And I applied some significant pressure. Now I couldn't prove that. I didn't have a torque wrench there. But I take my penny and with a little bit of pressure, I can unwind it. Took a little bit more effort to unscrew it, but basically that was it. It didn't go any deeper than that. It basically bottomed out. Where's it bottom out? Well, if you know the place where a screw first contacts where the threads start locking together on this rifle is at 7 o'clock. So it's from 7 to 9. That's all she wrote. I'm not going to get any tighter than that, from 7 to 9. That's a very, very tight setting. Now at the same time, I'm also noticing, and this is something that you can do with every rifle, no matter if it's a centerfire rifle or whatever. You can feel by holding the gun in this position around the stock and the barrel, you can feel for any squishiness, which is evident in that relationship between the stock and the barrel. And there is none. There's none whatsoever. It's dead. So in other words, there's nothing pulling together. Let me illustrate what I'm talking about. I've got this little jig here. This basically is this would be an exaggerated warp of a stock, and the barrel being pulled down back here with a screw would keep pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling. And I've seen as much as, with grossly warped stocks, I've seen as much as 3.5 turns from where the threads start to engage one another. I've seen 3.5 turns before it comes to a stop, and it's not a dead stop. It's what I call a squishy bottom. In other words, it always feels a little bit muddy, and it just doesn't come to a dead stop. Ideally, all bedding screws should just simply stop. There's a certain point where those threads come together and mate, and just like that 7 to 9, if it's a glass bedded stock with epoxy and with pillars, it's going to come to a stop. It's going to go probably only from 8:30 to 9. It's only a very slight amount of pulling. But I do hear people ask me, and one of the things that was related to me today was that, and I'm a Ruger armorer. I spent time at the factory over in Newport, New Hampshire, and I spent some, aside from learning how to build, their handguns, their wheel guns, and things like that, and how to build and how to put together Mini 14s. I also spent some special, because I was working on such guns, I spent some special time with their repairman. They had a shop where there was a guy he spent his whole day basically fixing the guns that people would send him with, letters of complaint, this, that, or the other thing isn't functioning, and can you make it work? So that's what he did. So he brought me into a shop, and I spent an entire, actually day and a half with him, basically going over all the different issues that people have. And he was very clear about one thing. With stock screws, the stock screws are there to hold the system together. That's all they're there for. There's no adjustment regarding the screw settings. They don't even use torque. They don't even use torque wrenches at the factory. You'd have to go to the die and tool maker in order to find a torque wrench in the whole factory. They don't use torque wrenches. It's not necessary. There's a couple of applications where perhaps a torque wrench was once used to set a pneumatic wrench so that they could apply the same pressure with a pneumatic wrench that maybe installs the gas block screws on a Mini 14 or something like that to a uniform pressure. But it is not an adjustment. It's simply to make sure that it stays together, so that in this case, so that the stock doesn't fall off on the ground, and when the kid's carrying it through the woods. That's all. That's the only intention, is to make sure that the stock and the barreled action remain one and the same. 20 pounds is the limit that they set, so that you don't pull that escutcheon right through with their pneumatic wrenches. That's the reason why they use a 20-pound setting. It's a fence post. It's a guideline, so that they know that would basically mean snug. You know, that basically means just snug. That's all. 20 pounds is a very light amount of torque. You know, when you start getting in screw designations and bolts and all that stuff, you know, it is snug, there's tight, there's very tight, and then is where you get out a wrench and, you know, basically a breaker bar, and you start applying, you know, some serious muscle to it. But we're not installing barrels into a receiver here and putting crush fits. It's nothing more than simply holding the parts together. So let's see if I go into the owner's manual of the 1022, which kind of is very revealing. Reassembly of the rifle. Now this is about the, you know, how to disassemble a gun completely, take it down, and, you know, remove the bolt and all the parts and everything for cleaning, which I went through in a separate video. But the reassembly of the rifle, it says assemble the barrel dash receiver to the stock by following in reverse order steps 1 through 5 under disassembly instructions on page 23, which is in the page preceding. So in that page, item 1 is simply about pointing it in a safe direction. Rear sight leaf should be down. The second the second one is loosen the barrel band screw and remove the barrel band, which this one doesn't have. Now, item number 3, loosen the takedown screw. Part B65. That's it. Loosen, don't remove the takedown screw. So, what's the reverse of loosen? Be tighten. That's all. There's no torque designation given because there isn't any. There's no need for it. Well, I know that you have a gun which has a sweet spot. Well, the opposite of a sweet spot is a sour spot. I'll be very, very clear about this. If you have a gun with a sweet spot, it means that you have a gun that's sick. You've got a gun which is being adjusted. In other words, it's being treated for its illness by a screwdriver setting, by tightening to a particular setting. That means that you've got a warp in that relationship. You've got a mismated barrel and action to stock relationship. Something squishing there. So in other words, as you're tightening and tightening and tightening, you get to 10 pounds of torque, and you know, you don't have a very good group. You get to 15 pounds of torque, 16 pounds of torque, and you notice that your groups are starting to shrink, and you get up to 18 pounds of torque, and they tighten up nice. And 25 pounds of torque, it seems like they're even better. So you got a sweet spot. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's because you got a gun that needs to be corrected. That gun is basically got a poor bedding. Bedding of any rifle. Now, I covered bedding in 2 very thorough videos with a Tika. But basically, bedding is only to stabilize something which is unstable. In the case of a 1022, and this relates to virtually all 22s, you have to remember that the cost factor involved with making a 22 is significantly different than it is with a centerfire. Centerfire rifles typically, expensive 22s, will have a threaded barrel and receiver relationship. In other words, they're threaded together, and that thread makes sure that there's even tightness all the way around. It gives them good strength and support so that the barrel basically swings off of that thread, and it needs very, very little support beside that at all. You know, you can provide a little additional support by bending out in front of that screw with a heavy barrel, and it will provide a little bit greater stability, and it might also provide a little bit better longevity to the dampen the vibrations that keeps the receiver from loosening up in its bedding. So that's a preferable thing. But with this rifle, as with so many 22s, the barrel is simply slipped into the, or I should say pressed under pressure, into the receiver. It's pretty difficult to get out. If I took the V-block, there's a V-block that is underneath this barrel and receiver. If I took that V-block out, I'm not going to get that barrel out very easily. You know, I've taken them out before. It takes some serious effort. You might have to use some sort of a barrel wrench and snug things up in a vise in order to get some of them apart because they're really, really tight. and they're intended to be very tight in order to keep them from falling out. That V-block alone is not going to retain that barrel if it's not really tight. When I say retain it, it's going to hold it in place, but it's not going to keep it from flapping around. I had a very disturbing incident happen to me quite a number of years ago, back in the 80s. I bought a beautiful 7722 with a varmint barrel. It was their nice stainless version with the laminated stock and everything, early 90s maybe. I decided, well, you know, I shot it for groups, and I shot pretty good groups at 50 or 100 yards. And I decided, well, I was going to improve upon it by doing what I always did with rifles, was to free float it. Well, I had a horror show suddenly happen, because when I free floated it, my beautiful small groups at 100 yards just bloomed, and they fell off the bottom of the paper. I didn't even have any groups on the paper. I had to go back to 25 yards to discover, to my horror, that the barrel had just basically sagged in the receiver, that the stock was providing so much upward pressure that it was keeping that barrel positioned in an upward mode. Well, I finally corrected it. I had to, you know, I took the barrel out, and you know, I could physically feel that without the V-block. I could physically feel that barrel wiggling, and yet if I measured the outside dimension of the barrel to the inside dimension of the receiver, they were exactly the same to the thousandth of an inch. But that's a long barrel, and there's very, very little support there, and it's enough to cause a little bit of wiggle. So I epoxied them back together, and I provided a little bit of you know, bedding material out in front of that receiver, and I restored its accuracy, actually improved its accuracy. But that was one of the things that I encountered with it. Well, on a small scale, even though this barrel is nowhere near as heavy, it's the same barrel relationship in the same receiver assembly system. It uses the same V-block, it's the same mechanism that retains that barrel and receiver in a tight mount. So, Ruger knows how to build their guns. They know that if they don't provide support out in front of that barrel, that eventually that sag is going to continue to increase until the barrel basically loses all stability. So they provide what you would call neutral pressure on that barrel. The whole barrel and receiver relationship are essentially neutral, like that. In other words, there is no upward pressure. There's no difference between one end to the other. Now there may be a tad, just a modicum, you might say, of positive upward pressure to ensure that relationship is not lost. In other words, by providing just a little bit of, you know, setting the machinery so that there's just a little bit of upward cast on that barrel, on that stock, will ensure that the barrel has a nice firm home, so that it's not going to start slapping around and causing accuracy problems. So that's built into it, but it's so slight that 7 to 9 relationship with the penny is sufficient to drag that together, and that's probably why it's not bedding when it hits 9 o'clock, because there is that slight amount of give. It's pulling it down just that slight amount. That's what we're looking for. So we're looking for basically retightening that which was loosened when you undo it. You know, if you go to any brand new 1022 on the market, that's all you're going to find. You're going to find that screw is basically set to somewhere nothing more than 20 pounds. That's a limit. That's not an accuracy setting, and that's not some sort of strategic number that you have to worry about. So put away your torque wrenches, and you know, you don't have to keep enriching people with all these different gadgets that you don't need, because you know, you just simply tighten the thing and be done with it, and don't worry about it. Most gunsmiths don't play with that sort of tooling system, and those that are of a new breed that think that they have to, for the same reason that everybody else is being sold on it, is because they think they have to. You know, we never use torque wrenches to tighten the screws on the side plate of a Smith & Wesson. when the screw top stopped turning, you stopped turning it. That's all. You didn't keep applying pressure because you don't want to rip the screw head apart. So don't get wild about this stuff. So if you do have a gun, what if you do have a gun that has that illness where there's tremendous where you're basically leveraging the stock and the barrel together? Well, the simple old system that every gunsmith ever used was to get one of two products, usually printer's ink, which we use printer's ink for for inking fingerprints, for doing fingerprints. You can use printer's ink, which is a little harder to find now because printers are no longer really in existence. But you can get Prussian blue, which is what machinists use. Prussian blue just comes in a small tube. It's made. I had a tube of it someplace here, but I don't see it anymore. I've moved it. But basically, it comes in a small, like a small squeeze tube, and you use very, very little. One tube of Prussian blue will last a machinist for years in most cases. You just simply apply a little bit of it with a artist paintbrush on the steel, on the barrel, and set the receiver and barrel into the stock, and just simply squeeze it with your hands. That's all you need to do, and then take it out and see where the high spot is. Now, just like a dentist will determine where the high spots are on your new fillings, so he takes, his technician will take a holder with carbon paper and drag it between your clenched teeth, and it'll leave a blue spot on your tooth, and then he irritates you by drilling and making that horrible sound, and he's removing the high spot. That's what you do with your stock. Basically, you just go at it with a dowel wrapped with sandpaper. You can use a fairly coarse grit of sandpaper, like maybe 100 grit or something like that, and simply scuff out the high spot. Now you repeat this process over and over and over again until the blue is left. You keep on replacing the blue on your barrel where it's rubbed off, but you basically until you have blue all the way along that barrel channel. Because with the 1022, again, you want to have equal pressure along that entire barrel channel, because that's basically just giving it a nice home. If you want to get more exotic than that, and if you want to get into trying to free float the barrel, my best wishes to you, because there's not an awful lot to work with back here. You've got to be very sure to stabilize that. You've got to get some positive support underneath. I would say at least an inch and a half to 2 inches or more of barrel surface there to keep that barrel from sagging, because otherwise the vibration is just going to keep opening up that receiver and barrel relationship, and pretty soon things are going to get sloppy. So I don't recommend with the 1022 that you go ahead and do much free floating. I prefer to basically leave that relationship together. And the reason why you can do that more easily with a 22 is simply that you don't have the violent harmonics and nodes and overtones that you have with a centerfire rifle. Even with a 22 Hornet, you'll have much more violent harmonics, and that's why they have to, with the 77-22 Hornet, they have to screw the receiver and barrel together. So you don't have that violence, so it's perfectly acceptable to simply have the barrel just sit there on top of the stock and go to sleep, and you'll have perfectly fine accuracy. Now, you have certain guns out there like Browning's T-bolt and things like that have free floated. They have a lot of support in that barrel relationship to the receiver, so they can free float the barrel, and they can do it without any concern about that sag. But such is not the case with the 1022, and I'm not picking on it because these are great guns. I love shooting my 1022. They're very accurate from the factory. This barrel is far more accurate than most people would give it credit for. If they simply use decent ammo, and it's not a target barrel. It's not intended to be a target barrel. It's fairly light. It's not a super barrel, and you can get better ones than that. But these are far more accurate than many people will give them credit for. So that's all I have to say on the issue. sell your torque wrench. You don't need your torque wrench unless you're installing something critical on a gun. Very few things on a gun require anything more than intelligent tightness. Just don't get wound up about it, and don't seek answers on the internet about how much torque pressure and sweet spots and all that, because if you had a sweet spot, you got a sour spot. That's all. Well, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends about us. God bless.